Greetings and salutations, and welcome to the Whiskey Wednesday edition. My co-host, the ninja, Dr. Jason Pittman, is here once again, and we have a special guest. He is the author of C-Suite and Beyond. He's worked for such notable companies such as Colgate-Palmolive, Phillips, Lavazza, and is a certified member of the John Maxwell Group. Please welcome Tom Kereszti. I'm your host, Dr. Dan Ford, and this is EchelonOrchid.
Guess who's back?
Good evening, gentlemen. And, first off, Tom, did I say your last name right? Because, I want to make sure that I did.
Yeah, well, the easiest thing is just to say Tom, right?
Yeah.
You can't go wrong with that.
Not everyone has a universal name like Ford.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Tom, I really appreciate you coming on this evening. I know you're on. I don't know. Are you on the West Coast this evening, or are you somewhere else in the world?
No, I'm on the West Coast. I don't want to call. I'm definitely not retired, but I'm part owner in two businesses, so I guess I'm what I call semi-retired. So we moved down to Southern California a number of years ago, and we just love it here. And frankly, with all the traveling I did all over the world all the time, I mean, at one time I flew, I think it was like 200 some odd thousand miles on British Air and about another 200,000 Lufthansa. So close to 400,000 air miles in 1 year. So I'm literally to the point where if I never have to get on another airplane again, I'm really happy.
Yeah, you've got me way beat. I think the most I did in any given year was just over 150,000 in a year. I mean, that's a quarter of what you did.
Yeah, people don't understand that it's not glamorous after like the first 1,000. I did about 150 myself going between LA and DC 1 year. And yeah, I'm like you. If I don't have to get on a plane again, I'm not upset about it.
So my worst airline story was I was flying back and forth between London and Brazil. And I was flying British Air, and I was always flying business. So we had just gone out to, we were trying to make an acquisition. So we're in Sao Paulo, and we go out to one of these churrascaria restaurants or something. It's like one of those where you have the green light, red light tag on your table. And as long as you got a green light, they just keep bringing meat after meat after meat. So I just finished this whole thing. And then I have to leave the restaurant and go right to the airport to get on a flight to fly back to London. And they bumped me to first class. So now I'm in first class, but I can't eat a thing. I can't drink anything. I am so full. I'm just like laying there trying to work off this huge dinner that we had for like 3 hours. And oh man, it was such a waste of a first class ticket.
See, what I liked when I lived in Southern California, I lived down the street from a churrascaria, and if you went for dinner, that's when they brought the exotic meats out, like the alligator and stuff like that. That was always a good time.
Alligator, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was. It tasted good.
Yeah, alligator's good. I mean, I just got back from New Orleans, and I had alligator down there. I had turtle soup for the first time. I'd always kind of thought about passing on it, but tried some of the turtle soup, and of course I had gumbo like almost every day.
So
when you guys talk about China, when I was in the Far East, I had snake.
Yeah,
yum.
So did you find, Dan, the alligator to be somewhere between pork and chicken?
I mean, there's so much spices on that. I probably could only tell you that it was protein.
It wasn't salad.
No, it definitely wasn't salad. There were just so many, I mean, I'm in Cajun country, right? I mean, it's just, that's what I mean. So everything, I probably couldn't tell you if there was alligator in any of the gumbo I was having, if it was chicken or shrimp or whatever, because I mean, it was just so much.
Yeah.
I mean, I love it. I mean, if I lived in New Orleans, I'd probably gain 20 pounds.
See, and we used to have turtle soup growing up. I had a neighbor. Imagine Magnum PI, but this dude was 7 feet tall, but that's what he looked like. Yeah. And every
But he
weekend,
didn't have a mustache like this.
no, man, he had the Magnum PI mustache.
Yeah.
And so this dude, his name was Rod, man. He was super intimidating. Never said a word. I don't think I ever heard the guy talk. 15 years. But every weekend, man, he would go out and hunt snapping turtles and make soup out of it.
Interesting.
What are you gonna do, man?
Yeah, I had turtle soup in Mexico when I lived down there. So there's very few things I haven't eaten. I love everything. I have two things that I just can't stomach. One is caraway seeds, and the other one is cinnamon. Other than that, I'm fine.
Interesting. So no traditional cappuccinos for you.
No cinnamons, and no, there's a liqueur up in Northern Europe. It's like Finland, Sweden. It's called akavit, and akavit is made out of caraway seeds. And
Interesting.
one time I had it, I didn't know what it was. They just said, akavit, have some. I spit it out. I almost threw up on the spot. I was like, what the hell is this? My God.
Wow, interesting. It's kind of how I am with agave. So I can't do tequila. It doesn't sit well with me. But I don't like, even agave sweetener, things like that just I don't do well with. So, outside of that, there's just things I don't like. Like I don't like black olives and I don't like mushrooms.
Wow. How about magic mushrooms?
Well, that's more Jason's alley than mine.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, okay, Jason.
He was in Southern California for a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah, a long time.
So, Tom, you've got this book out, C-Suite and Beyond. Now, one of the first parts is, get into it, which is kind of, at least for myself, Jason and I both have a daughter as well. It's Jason's only child, and he's got a stepson, and I've got two boys. And one of the things that I'm very interested in is that really how you got your younger daughter to lead her to whatever was successful, because she just didn't want to do anything that you wanted her to do. Like she wasn't taking the punishments, which kind of reminds me of my daughter, Natalie. Like you could tell her, put her nose up to the wall with her toes. And actually she'll just be like, I'll sit here all day long, but I'm not doing what you want. And she's even gone so far as to say, I'm going to do this. Just tell me how long I need to stand with my nose to the wall, but I'm still doing this.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think it was 2 days ago, it was International Women's Day.
Yep.
So, I posted a picture, and I've been surrounded with women all my life. Since I was a kid, I grew up with my mom and my grandma. I have a wife and 3 daughters. So I've been surrounded with women, and I've been blessed by women. They're just fantastic folks. So I say that they are the people that made me the man I am today, because I have a little bit different worldview, just because I'm always surrounded with women. And I hear, their needs. I hear what they want. I hear what concerns them. So kudos to them. They've come a long way. I think my wife's grandmother was actually one of those first folks that got to vote in the U.S. for the first time. So they've come a long way. But look, regarding your question, and regarding daughters, or really any individual, they buy into stuff when they think there's something in it for them, right? If you can't make people do things just because you think it's the right thing to do, you have to influence them. You have to influence them to say, look, it makes sense for you to do this because you're going to benefit from it. And I think if you position it that way, yeah, a 2.5 or 3-year-old, they can't really grasp the fact of how am I going to benefit by standing against the wall with my nose touching it, right? It's not an easy sell, right? So that's one of those, well, you have to do it because I told you to do it. And look, that's real life also. Some people say, okay, well, I'll do it because I don't want to be fired. So I'll do what you tell me to do. I don't want to do it. I think it's stupid. I don't have my heart in it. I don't have, anything in it. So I'm just going through the motions of doing what you're asking me to do because you're the boss. Versus, yeah, I'm on board. I'm sold. I want to do it. I'll work 14 hours a day. I'm going to put all my energy into this. I'm going to make this happen. It's a very different scenario.
Yeah, I started to resonate with that aspect because one of the things that I've learned is that leadership is the inverse relationship with power. The more times I have to use my position of power, the less effective I am as a leader over time. And the thing that you had said in this first parts of the book, whereas you're like, you're going to do this because I'm your father, and she's like, I don't care.
Yeah, right. Well, and so that makes me wonder, one of the things that Dan and I have talked about before, we have some overlap now. Even though I'm a full-time academic, I lead a lot of research teams of undergraduates. And so it's like running a bunch of small startups with their kids, right? I mean, at best, they're 22. Most of them are younger than that. And so part of what I found interesting about your approach in your narrative that you tell is it comes across the high degree of empathy, at least as I interpreted it. And now that you're talking about your experience, especially being surrounded by women, do you think part of that has given you this sense of drawing on your own empathy for people around you to lead them towards that correct answer? Does that make sense?
Sure. Well, look, I think John Maxwell, we brought him up. John Maxwell has a saying that people don't come along with you unless they know that you get along, or unless they get along with you. So people will only come along with you if you care. People only will come along with you, and there's another one saying people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So it's all about what you call empathy, and empathy is really starting to connect with other individuals because you feel their pain, you feel their motivation, and then they basically say, yeah, I mean, this guy's not asking me to do something for the sake of doing it. He's really does look out for me. He really does look out for my benefit. He really does care about what I want, what I think. So yeah, I'll come along for the ride. And that's your 100%. It's all about empathy.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Tom, you've worked for all these companies. What do you think was the most interesting of the companies that you've worked for? Which provided you the most interesting challenges, and how do you think it really helped shape you, and how you help shape others?
Well, that's a really tough question because I think
thank you.
Every company every company I worked for, I gained some knowledge, I gained some know-how, and I also gave myself to them. Right. Clearly, I mean, when I was a kid that was hired out of college by Colgate-Palmolive, I mean, that was my, exponential learning curve because that was my first job. So I learned a lot. I had some great mentors there. There were some great leaders in that company. So there was a lot of learning there. But, early on in my life, I wasn't making, $20, $30 million acquisitions. Right? So that didn't come until later on. So, managing $1 billion merger, that didn't come until, 20 or 30 years later. So at each part of my journey, and I hate using that word journey because, everybody watches The Bachelor, it's our Bachelorette. Oh, well, my journey. So yeah, let's not use the word journey, but each part of my career, each part of my level of maturity, I was in a different company, learning different things and giving back for myself different things and mentoring others. So, which one? Well, clearly when I first started, I learned the most because that was the steepest learning curve. And, the last gig I held, which was working for the Strauss family, I would say that was like the highest level. That's where I had 2,000 employees across 12 countries, and we're literally buying businesses for 20, 30, 40, $50 million. So, yeah, each one you kind of learn something different and you give back something different.
Yeah, definitely. I think back to all the mentors I've had in the different stages of my career, and I've tried to put them kind of into chapters where when I was at XM Radio, I mean, I had to be on my top technical chops, which was much different than when I moved into the C-suite for the first time. By doing that, I mean, it was a much different, and I had different mentors to help me through those periods of time. And I remember my vice president of IT at XM Radio. He was basically sat me down. He's like, one, you're the highest maintenance engineer I've ever had. And two, he was like, look, at a certain point in time, you're going to have to choose as to whether or not you're going to be, you have to choose whether you're going to be a super techie person or you're going to go and be a leader.
Yeah. Well, sorry about these visual difficulties here, guys.
That's
No,
all
it's
right.
all right. It's actually, I was thinking it kind of reminds me of Star Trek, where you're getting ported in and out. It's kind of cool, to be honest with you.
He did quote Spock one time in the book.
Yeah, I thank you for getting the reference. So let me ask both of you a question, because I wonder about this sometimes. I'm biased in a certain way because of the vertical I work in, where I spend a tremendous amount of time synthesizing other people's information, and it's less about them and it's more about their product. And so when you guys talk about mentors, to you guys, is it specific people that were a mentor, or was it an attribute that somebody had that you kind of picked up on, and that's the mentor or the mentorship?
Well, for me, I've had many mentors in my life that I never met, right? Or I barely met. Back in I think it was like mid or late '80s. Rudy Giuliani was the mayor of New York City, and he came out with a book called Leadership. And I read that book and I loved it. It was right after. Actually, it was right after 9/11. So he wrote that book right after 9/11. So it couldn't be in the late '80s. It was after that. And, he kind of described how he led New York City through that crisis. And I thought it was a great book. And I never met Rudy, but I learned a lot. And so I can say, look, Rudy, in a sense, was my mentor by just reading the book. I actually met Rudy later on when I was running for president. I went to one of the functions. There was a fundraising function for him. He didn't do too well as a candidate, right? But I've had many mentors. I mean, I never met Simon Sinek, and he's got some great books out, that I read. So you can have people mentoring you who you never met, and you can have people mentoring you that was side by side with you for 2 or 3 years. I had, people that I worked with or worked for that mentored me, and we were side by side. So I think all those things are possible.
Interesting.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Absolutely, because I've read a lot about Alan Mulally and his leadership style, and that's something that I feel at least has influenced me for sure. But then I get to some of the ones that I've had in person. The unique attribute, answering your question, Jason, was that a good mentor can see right through all the bravado, and they can really peel back the curtain from like the Wizard of Oz. They can see who the man behind the curtain is and really get down to bringing it raw to you. And sometimes that's uncomfortable, but I think it's what's needed.
Sure.
Sometimes, and so I've had a lot of them, throughout my career that were really able to call me out on my bullshit, to be honest. I mean, it's kind of what it was. And I needed it, as well as all these other influencers. I mean, John Maxwell, I could say I've taken quite a bit from, going through with Ari Weinzweig, even though I've gotten to meet him. I really like his philosophies. There's so many different people that can influence you without ever having to meet.
Yeah, it's just sometimes I wonder, because I think part of pop culture espouses this view that you need mentors, and it seems, at least in my view, to target, like, you need to find a person that can impart this knowledge to you. And often, well, I mean, especially in a globalized world like we live in, you can connect with people, like this is how we're having this conversation. But you don't, like, I think that's well said, Tom. You don't necessarily have to meet somebody in person and share time and space with them. You can read their books. You can listen to podcasts. You can listen to their interviews. And I don't know that it's equivalent, but it still counts, right? I mean, of course it does.
Yeah.
No, it all counts. And I think the other thing that you said, Jason, which is very true, is, you don't necessarily have to have a person mentor you, but you can just look at an action that they took, and just by their action, you can learn from them. So, I'll give you guys 2 examples. One example is, I was a single guy. I was dating my wife for close to 10 years before we got married. And, I came from a broken marriage. My father and my mother divorced at a very young age. So I grew up with my mom and my grandma. So I didn't have really a good example of what a solid marriage looks like, right? And, I didn't particularly think that, Kathy's parents were the most exciting couple in the world. So I was like, well, if that's what marriage is like, that's pretty boring. I don't know if I want to, sign on to that. And then, I met Joey and Marianne, who were friends with my parents-in-law. And they were exciting. They were happily married for 20, 30 years, and they were always going out and doing something. I was like, oh, all right, now I get it. Right. So they didn't really mentor me, but I can tell you, I told this story to Kathy also. I decided that, okay, I think I'm ready for marriage after I met Joey and Marianne. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So I was going to say, you're speaking of Kathy, you talk about in the book 9/11 and all the things that she did. I mean, with especially Virgin Atlantic, which, you all didn't reach out to. What did you learn from your wife about leadership and just her as a person during that time, and how did it influence you for the future?
Well, there was two things that I learned. One thing is it was a classic example where you don't need the corner office and you don't need the title, right? In the book, I talk about adapt a worthy cause to follow, and that's really what Kathy did. It was 9/11. People were just, stranded at Heathrow Airport. They had no money. They had no housing, no lodging, and British Air wouldn't do anything for them because, simply put, they said it was an act of war. It's not the airline's responsibility, so everybody's on your own. And it was just, Kathy's literally watching on Sky News, all these people in the background just like totally devastated, stranded. Granted, their situation was nowhere near bad as the people downtown New York City, but it was still, something that she felt she had to do something about. And then she, just went out and said, okay, well, how can I help? And the two occurring themes were housing and food. And then she just thought about, hey, we have all these beautiful houses for the expat community with full refrigerators and beautiful showers. So let's house all these folks. There's no hotel rooms available. So, let's do an Airbnb, free Airbnb, right? So just kind of organizing that whole event and getting people to follow her lead and get people to get on the train and offer to help and offer facilities and offer, amenities. And that's how it all kind of started. It was just like, it didn't start to say, hey, I'm the head of British Air and I have, I'm the CEO, so I think I should do something for these people. It was, hey, I'm just a, expat housewife raising kids and I want to do something good. And before she knows, she built a movement. So, the learning is you don't need a budget, you don't need a title, and you can still do something really quick and really great.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that a company of British Airways stature did not take a position of leading with empathy in this case, and especially in a time of that crisis. I mean, those were very much extenuating circumstances. Hopefully never happens again in the history of the world. And as I'm, thinking about that, and as you'd mentioned, here she was, she didn't have a position of title, and she just felt that cause and need to kind of rise up. And so I'm wondering, why do you think people in general don't feel like they're capable of being a leader?
I think some people naturally like attacking a challenge, and some people don't. Some people just like, very happy sitting on the couch and watching TV. And I don't know why one person doesn't like sitting on the couch and watching TV and wants to go out and, play sports or something productive, and another person doesn't. I think part of it is upbringing. If your parents push you, maybe you push yourself a little bit harder. And I don't know what is the right answer for it, but I do know that if you're inclined to better yourself, even if you're not a great leader today, you could be a great leader tomorrow. But it starts with stepping out of your comfort zone and saying, I want to do this.
I tend to agree. I'm the CIO at a credit union in Long Island, and I'm trying to teach even the tellers and what we call member service reps what it means to be leaders in their position, because they have a level of authority and responsibility, such as they can waive $50 worth of fees to a member before they have to get additional approval. And our CEO's got his approval level is I think it's $750,000 before he's got to go to the board. So we all have a scope. And so I've been really trying to teach them, hey, you can be a leader in leading every single member you come into contact with as to why we're the best financial institution on Long Island. And here's some things that you can do. Part of that's just being in service.
Well, see, and I think part of that too is, Dan and I talk a bit about these archetypes. And so when I hear you describing that, Tom, what I hear is not only the call to action in the classic storytelling structure, but then it's part of the hero's journey that is the response to that call to action. And I think sometimes, like when I see students struggling, it's because they don't scope what that is to them correctly. And so I agree with you. Not all people are dispositionally capable or interested in slaying dragons, because that's a big journey, right? Yeah. And it requires an enormous amount of sacrifice, courage, and fortitude, and probably a high tolerance for failure too, right? But not everybody has to slay dragons, because not everything's a dragon. Sometimes the problems that are even more important are necessarily more small and more immediate. And I think leadership, at least the way I perceive it and the way I read your words, is that scope of leadership, or that bubble, can scale. That's kind of what I thought about your question, Dan.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
Sure. So I'll have to, I'll slightly pivot a little bit into this case, because still sticking with the book, because I got to say it looked very, very familiar when you were talking about, your 4 types of people in building a team to the Michigan model of leadership. And so since that is the absolute best university in the country, those that you say are prone to action, that's for my Ross alumni, my cohort mates, that's our blue folks. Those hyper analytical folks are red. The big picture folks are green, and the human touch is yellow. So Tom, where do you see yourself in those categories? Like, if you had to pick one that most represented you, which one of those people are you?
So I was fortunate enough back in the early 80s, when I first started working for Colgate-Palmolive, they actually gave me the Myers-Briggs test. And then they gave me an LSI test. And then throughout the years, whether it was strength finders, whether it was DISC, I'm pretty consistent, right? So I'm a very extroverted, action-oriented guy. The problem was, and the light went on for myself early on in my career, where after I took the first Briggs-Myers test and said, man, now I understand why I had no time, no patience, and I couldn't stand certain people in the world. Right. And I used to, those analytical types, I used to call them procrastinators. Like, guys, come on, just make a decision. How difficult is this? And I said, what's wrong with you? Why can't you make a decision? And it's basically, look, it's not that they didn't want to make a decision. They just needed more data points. Right. So I had to, what I would call, flatten my curve, because I was very steep. I was a high, a high action-oriented person. And then, the second one was more strategic thinking, right? But I was very low in analytics. And I also rub people the wrong way. I piss people off. And then I kind of realized, well, I guess the reason I'm pissing people off is because I'm pretty direct, and I'm very action-oriented. I'm very task-oriented. And I really don't care, that your feelings go hurt. I just want to get the task done. Right. So that's the way I looked at the world, but that's not how they looked at the world. So really, for me, the big benefit of this was the light went on and said, okay, well, not everybody sees the world like I do. They see it through a different lens, and we all want the same solution. We all have the same problem. We all want to get the same solution, but we're going to get there a little bit differently. So let's appreciate the other thinking, and let's involve the other thinking, because they probably bring some good stuff to the table on how to solve problems. because mine is not the only solution. So once I started understanding, I became a much better leader.
Yeah, so you probably hate Jason because he's very analytical. It's interesting as to how you describe it, because it's regardless of which flavor or spin you put on it, it's always come as these competing agendas, and they're all those competing the opposites. Michigan does it in a wheel with the colors, and you can kind of see what's at the opposite. And it's always surprising to me that in most of those, I come out, and in my case, I'm a little bit higher in yellow, which is the people oriented, even though I tend to piss people off a lot. But some of the people that I tend to piss off are not typically the ones that report directly into me. They're not necessarily peers, but they'll be the subordinates of my peers, because they'll just do something that I feel is, stupid. I mean, that's probably a little bit of one of my detractors coming out, because I really shouldn't say they're stupid. I should probably be looking a little bit more as to trying to figuring out why they think that way. But I kind of go, that was absurd. Why would you do that?
Yeah, well, and I think, like Tom said, we've talked about this before, Dan. I think where when you learn to take a step back and take a breath and start to understand the behavioral incentive system that somebody has, you can co-opt it. And it's almost like they're another planet that you can go visit. And if you look at it like an adventure, it at least for me, it gets less frustrating. Being high action, task oriented myself, and analytical, I suppose.
And the other lesson for me was to say, the most people have the tendency to surround themselves with like-minded individuals. Sometimes they even call it chemistry. We got the chemistry, right? But the danger of that is, if you all think alike, you all have the same blind spots.
Yep.
So the key to a really good functioning, highly functional team is to make sure that you balance it with all those different thinking methodologies. So everybody brings something different to the table, and then you're going to have healthy debates, but you're going to have pretty good solutions, right? So that's the beauty of it. Once you appreciate it, and the other thing as a leader you have to do is you have to get people to understand that each one of them brings something different to the table, and it's very valuable. And once they understand that, then they appreciate each other, and they're a little bit more patient, and they find common ground, and they find solutions. So it's not only putting those different types of people in the room, but also managing that process so they'll understand why they're in the room.
One of the things that I struggle with, Tom, with my direct reports, or even those that I just would say even managers within my organization, I struggle with when we have a particular question that we are, needing to go through to answer. And where I struggle is, do I give them my opinion up front, or do I give them my opinion at the end? Because I kind of go, if I give it to them up front, maybe I'm influencing people. But I really hate when someone says, hey, what do you think of this? And then they don't tell you what it is they think. And if I do it at the end, I sometimes feel like that, bully is probably not the right word. I can't think of something off the top of my head. Or that I'm steamrolling them. Like, well, this is what I think. And I struggle with that.
Well, one of the things I learned from one of my mentors is you have a healthy debate, but at the end, the casting vote is always the leader's casting vote, right? So one of the examples I use in the book is when we were making an acquisition in Brazil, and we had different, we had all the classical mindsets in the room, so that was great because it was well balanced. And everybody, before we made a final decision, everybody went around the room and said, okay, this is why I support the project or I don't support the project.
Yeah.
You're still there?
Oh, yeah. I'm just changing cameras on you.
Oh, okay. I thought I lost my connection or something.
So, throwing a little bit of a curveball.
So we went around the room and we just basically, everybody put their opinions on the table, and everybody was heard. Everybody's voice was heard. And then, Erez, who was my boss, he had the final casting vote, right? Now, he was also smart. If you go around the room and 9 people out of 10, support the project for specific reasons, I mean, you got to have a pretty good reason why you're going to veto 9 people, right? So, that's, I don't know if that answers your question directly of whether going first or last, but I think if everybody's voices is heard, but the leader has the casting vote, so he decides. She.
One of the things that I've noticed with that is, in the beginning of me joining an organization, I tend to favor going last until we've got a big enough rapport where they all understand. I don't want yes people. I have a blind spot. You all are here to, basically close my blind spots. And then I tend to be more and more getting close to leading from the front in that particular case and go, this is what I think. Tell me how I'm wrong. Like, I want to know how I'm wrong. But it takes time for me to build up to that. But I still struggle, because even though, I mean, I can be a little bit dominating when it comes to some of them, and I don't want that to come across, but I tend to still do that, and people tend to go, well, Dan's been right all these other times. Why would he be wrong now? Maybe I'm wrong. And I don't want that. I want them to question everything until, yes, we have a solid plan.
Well, I think that's why it also helps to frame things as a question. And what I've tried to start doing for myself is not only framing things as a question, but framing it as a question where the answer cannot be no, right? So, do you want this? That's a yes, no, right? Or why wouldn't you want this? Well, of course you do, because I understand what your incentive is, and I'm trying to help you get to where it is, even if you don't realize that's what you want yet.
Yeah.
It's almost like an FBI negotiation with hostage takers tactic.
I don't negotiate with terrorists.
Hey, listen, man. I got to deal with a bunch of young adults. Sometimes they're terrorists and hostages all in one.
I get it. So, Tom, one of the things that Jason and I have debated at times, and I don't know that we're in agreement on this, but we talk about, for managers versus leaders. I posit that the opposite of leadership is complacency, because even the worst manager had to have some type of leadership to get to a management position. But they are different. And you talk about that, a manager does the right thing, but leaders, what was it that you put? Leaders.
Exactly opposite. Managers do things right.
Yeah.
And leaders do the right things.
Yes. Yeah. How did you come to this epiphany?
Just as you grow up and come into a higher level position, right? I mean, a manager is a mid-level position by design. So managers get into a position where there's already something status quo, and they just have to do a good job managing it. When you get into C-suite, you can't be a manager, right? When you get into C-suite, if you're a manager, your company's dead. You're not moving ahead. You're not growing. You're not flourishing. You're managing a status quo. And if you're a leader of a company and all you're doing is managing status quo, I can guarantee you in a number of years, you're out of business. So when you get into the C-suite, you have to behave and think like a leader. How am I going to grow this company from $10 million to $30 million, from $1 billion to $5 billion? How am I going to, is it going to be through new customers? Is it going to be through acquisition? Is it going to be new products? How am I going to get there? Complacency is, and being a manager, by definition, you're complacent.
So
I'm with Tom, by the way.
What's that?
I'm with Tom on that, by the way.
Yeah, Jason doesn't think the opposite of leadership is complacency, or at least you're not sold on that.
No.
I think it is. I think leaders are wanting to do something, and people that are not leaders are willing to let other people choose for them, which is where I go with complacency.
Yeah.
And I'll just call them managers.
They got to make decisions still. I mean, otherwise they're out of a job. They may not make great decisions, but I want acquisitions. when I learned from my MBA, and maybe maybe they're completely wrong. I can only tell you the data that I've got in that of all acquisitions, only 1/3 of them are successful, but 100% of the CEOs think they're in that 1/3 that are going to be successful. So what acquisition that you had to lead didn't go as planned? And what did you do to kind of course correct that?
So I believe if most acquisitions don't work for one of two reasons. One reason may be that somebody was totally in love with the company, and they way overpaid, overvalued the company, way overpaid for the company. And, in fact, there was the whole point behind an acquisition is 1 + 1 = 3. Right? It's not 1 + 1 = 2. 1 + 1 there's synergies there, and you want to get those synergies out. And those synergies become very small or diminish if you're overpaid. So, some people are just enamored with a certain company. They want to buy it, and then they overbid, they overpay, and then it doesn't work, right? Because the synergies are not there. Another one is, these are the two biggest ones. The second biggest one is the cultures. You kind of can't define what the new culture is going to be, right? So usually what happens is, look, a big company buys a small company, and a small company blends into the big company, and the big company has the culture already, right? But if the big company doesn't have a really defined culture, maybe the small company comes in, maybe they start dominating, maybe they have a mixed hybrid culture, and that's no good, right? So you have to have a very clear, defined culture of what the new company is going to look like with that acquisition absorbed, and some clear, again, targets of what those synergies are, how you're going to harvest those synergies so they become beneficial. And if you don't really design that up front, if you don't think about that up front, it's going to come back and bite you, and it's going to be quote unquote unsuccessful, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because almost those exact same words from our finance class was synergies. And it was almost defined exactly like that. Like, this is what, we're going to have this synergy. And, we studied certain companies that had good, acquisition strategy, and many that failed, and trying to analyze, well, why did they fail? And that was always difficult.
So I got a different question if you want to pivot a little bit.
Yeah.
So another thing that I found unique about your approach, Tom, is basing it in biblical story and Christian, let's say, morality. What led you to your decision to present the material in that context? Because I don't know that I've ever encountered another book that really emphasizes it the way you did. And I thought it was very unique and well done.
And I'll just add to that. Jason's my only pagan friend, so this kind of...
Well, look, obviously I put that twist on it because I'm a man of faith, right? I share in the book that every person should have a vision for their lives, a vision for themselves, and I shared in the book that my vision is man of God, leader of men. So everything that I do is going to honor God, and it's going to be some sort of leadership role. And the fact is, the Bible is probably one of the best, if not the best, leadership book ever written, right? I mean, it's basically an instruction manual for human mankind, right? I mean, how do we relate to each other? How do we behave? And there's just so many examples, and I list some of them in chapter 7 in my book on biblical principles. So the book really is not about, hey, if you're a Christian, then you got it right, and this is the way you should act, blah, blah, blah. But it does have an undertone to say, look, those values that I cherish, those values that make people successful, they are biblically based,
Yeah. Go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say, despite what Dan may tell people, I don't think there's much argument that at least the the West as we know it, Western culture, is completely founded on Judeo-Christian value. I mean, that's where the entirety of our moral structure comes from. Whether you like it or not, or you subscribe to it or not, that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's true, and I like to tease Jason about those kind of things. I mean, well, I'm not really teasing; he really is a pagan. But the interesting thing to me, and because I've after we talked maybe about 3 weeks ago, Tom, and reading your book, I've been really thinking about that aspect that you said. Those that have a spiritual foundation of something that they believe in, whether it be Christian or anything faith-based, versus those that might be, atheist, not believing in something. So I've asked this question of several people, those that tend to be more Buddhist, or those that were also more atheist. And when I put it into them, all of them pretty much had the same conclusion, that when you get people to believe in the cause that's greater than what that entity is, they will do more for it. I mean, if you're fighting for your kind of spiritual, what's the eternity, then you're going to do more than just for the paycheck. And, when we had talked, you had said that if you took a similar company in a similar market with a similar product, and one was, I think you said Christian based, you may have said faith based, but we'll say Christian based because, well, many people would say I'm a Christian, and I would rather people say that I am than me say it. Versus one that didn't, they will outperform. And when I posited that with everyone came to that same conclusion, and it was almost as if that should be common sense, yet the common sense seems to be lacking.
Well, and the other thing that I'll add to that is look, there may be a company who's very successful, and they have the right culture and they have the right values, and they may not think it's Christian based, but when you examine it's Christian based. I mean, if you look at their value system, if you look at their culture, you say, well, yeah, that's very Christian based. They may say, well, we're not faith based, we're not Christian, we're an atheist company. But again, look at the underlying factor. I think one of the things that faith based gives you is what I call absolute truths. And I think we live in a world of relative truth. What's true to me is not true to you. My truth is different from your truth, so everything becomes relative. And that's the world we live in today. And to me, that's dangerous. If you base your values on biblical values, those are absolute truth values, and they're not relative, and they stand the test of time.
That's exactly what Jordan Peterson says about Sam Harris. Even though he says Sam's not Christian, he goes, everything you're saying happens to be, biblical values. Just because you're not calling it that doesn't mean it's not it.
Yeah, well, because the correct term is first principle, and that's why it's irreducible, right? And that's why it is an absolute truth, despite whether you cite it in one of the 10 Commandments or in the Bhagavad Gita or some pagan text. I don't know, man. You call me a pagan, but I can't even name a book. Oh, because they didn't know how to write. That's right.
They told everything by stories.
Well, I mean, look, man, that's how an enormous amount of moral code gets transmitted, is through narrative, which is one of the things I enjoyed about your approach is it's very storytelling oriented, which resonates strongly with me.
Well, one of the examples I love using is, and you find in chapter 7 is, if you read the Old Testament or the Torah, or actually it's in the Quran also, because there's not a whole lot of difference between the Quran and Torah, but there's an example where Moses runs into his father-in-law Jethro, and Jethro tells Moses, man, Moses, you're going to burn out. You're just working way too hard. I mean, you just can't sustain this. So here, I got a better idea for you. This is what you should do. You should find judges, put them in charge of the groups of 10, and let them decide the easy cases and only bring the most difficult cases to you. So, that's kind of straightforward, but let me just break it down a little bit. So first of all, he says groups of 10. Why 10? If you look at any modern organization and you look at their C-suite, you can possibly lead about 10 people, right? If it gets, you have a CIO, a CMO, a CFO, COO, right? And then if it gets more than 10, then usually COO takes on a lot more responsibilities, and the CMO and the CIO start reporting to them. So 10 is a great number because it allows you to lead them, allows you to mentor them, it allows you to spend time with them. So it's a great number. Then the second thing that Jethro says is get the best judges. He doesn't just say get bodies, right? He says get the best people. So your hiring practices should be hiring highly qualified, highly motivated, great people. Don't just pick up bodies and put them into seats, right? And then the third thing Jethro tells Moses is train him in the laws, teach him the laws, right? So when you get some people in your organization, hire the best people for your organization, and then continue to mentor them, train them so they become better, right? And then the fourth one is, let him decide all the cases. So it's about delegation. So now you hire the best people, you train them, delegate to them, get out of their way. And then when they can't solve a problem, they got difficulty, then they'll bring it to you. So it's like, it's biblical, it's 3,000 years old, and it's true today. That's how you put together a team, and that's how you lead an effective team.
Well, it's interesting too, because the first principles like that get echoed cross-culturally. Like, one of the favorite books, at least for our generation, that gets quoted is Sun Tzu's Art of War. And Sun Tzu has this treatise on how do you manage 10,000? Well, by managing one. And it cascades down. And it's a very similar argument because it's a first principle. You can't really reduce that if you're going to grow. The science actually backs these numbers up too. This is something called Dunbar's constant, which governs group size. And past that certain size, the culture and the cohesiveness of the group dissolves. And then you start getting things like bystander effects and stuff like that. It's really interesting.
Yeah, the only difference, though, is that Sun Tzu wound up saying if one of your subordinates makes a decision without your approval, you should execute them.
Okay, man. Look, man, we're barbarians, dude. What do you want me to tell you?
I just had to call that out. He may have said manage, one, but then he also said if that person doesn't, ask your permission, you're out. Which is why, again, going back to the Judeo-Christian, they weren't like that.
Well, I don't know, man. The Romans came up with the whole idea of decimation. That is 1 in 10 dies when.
Well, they learned a lot from the Qin dynasty.
That's true. That's true.
Well, look, while we're on swords, the Old Testament is one of the goriest books ever written. I mean, there's a lot of gory stuff in there. But one of the things that I also use the Old Testament for vision, right? One of the things I say, look, culture and vision is sacred to a company. And you can't have any dissension on that because you can debate culture, you can debate vision all you want up front, but once you agree on it, everybody has to buy into it. And if you don't buy into it, you don't belong into the company. And one of the things that I use is again, Moses goes up to the top of the mountain, and it comes back down with the 10 commandments. And what does he find? He finds, all the gold has been melted, and they made, golden calves out of it, and they worship golden calves. So Moses says something very different, very simple. He says, okay, who's with me? Who still believes in the vision? One God, one vision, right? Who still believes in it? Okay, we believe in it. All right, Levites, go in, don't kill the enemy, kill everyone, every child, every man, every woman who's not a believer, and they took their own people out, right? Gory as hell, but it's another biblical lesson to say, look, if you have dissension, and you have dissension against your vision, against your culture, they have no room in your organization.
Absolutely. Culture will eat strategy for breakfast every day.
Yep.
So there's another part in the book, and this is something that I struggle with. But personally, I struggle with, because as learning that the only reason why a company exists is essentially for shareholder value, to increase shareholder value. But you talk about, the former CEO of Pepsi and how I say she was kind of leading with empathy because she knew, hey, the world is going down a direction that we probably don't want to go down. And yet we still need to have an increased shareholder value. How do you balance these things? I mean, when I look at some of the companies that exist today, and let's say the conspiracy theory is true that the tech companies are in support of concentration camps in China, and I won't say that it is or isn't, but there's some evidence there. But I kind of go, I mean, there might be some truth to it. I mean, we are producing stuff in China, and they're definitely lobbying against Congress in the United States.
Sorry about that.
That's a perfect for the
That's my Hungarian ringtone that somebody just tried to call me on.
nice. So, you know, I feel like there's some truth because these tech companies are lobbying against Congress in that they don't want to disclose where the manufacturing is happening inside of China. So, I mean, how do you balance that? I have an aspiring CEO at some point, and I'm wondering, how would I handle these things?
So look, those are two very opposites. You use the Pepsi and then you use the, technology. Yeah. So let's define shareholder value. What is shareholder value, right? Well, as a shareholder in a company, I'm trying to gain financial gain, right? As a shareholder, that's why I invested in your company. So my stock is worth more, my dividends are worth more, I can sell it for more, so it's a financial gain, right? And the same for a company, which is basically, how do you get to that? Well, you get through that through a P&L and a balance sheet. Now, all those things are not goals. They are measures, right? Shareholder value is a measure of how well you're leading the company. It's not a goal. If anybody tells you it's a goal, then they're mistaken. It's just, shareholder value is a function of your balance sheet, and your P&L and balance sheet are financial tools to measure how well you're doing, right? So when you look at the P&L, for example, well, one of the key indicators in a P&L of shareholder value is sales growth, right? So your sales growth comes from the things you do. So in the case of Pepsi, their sales growth came from doing good things, right? They came from eliminating sugar, eliminating diabetes, healthier eating. They actually benefited from a good cause. Their sales benefited from a good cause. So I don't think those are contradictory to me. I think you can do good things and still deliver shareholder value.
I mean, I hope so. I mean, that's what I want to believe, and then I look at some of the, I mean, it's history, right? So, even Ford Motor Company, who essentially decided that they would rather pay they'll pay the insurance claim than just fix the problem with the, I think it was the Nova. I don't remember which car it was, but where basically it had a malfunction. It was killing, like one person out of every 10,000 buyers, and they chose to pay the insurance claim. But it's something that, to be honest, they don't talk about in the MBA program, at least from anyone that I've spoken to, about that empathy aspect, about, well, do the right thing and you will get shareholder value, that they can be the same path. And I wonder if we're doing a disservice with a lot of the the business learnings that are out there.
Well, yeah, you're going to fire me off on a whole, new topic that I love talking about it. John Maxwell said this brilliantly, right? John Maxwell shares the story where during the times of Enron, right, his publisher came to him and said, "John, could you write a story on business ethics?" And John says, "No, I can't. There's no such thing as business ethics."
I agree.
And the guy and the publisher said, "What do you mean? I mean, look at Enron, look at all this stuff that's happening." And John said, "Look, there's no such thing as business ethics. There's just ethics. You're either ethical or you're not. If you're ethical in your business, you're ethical in your family, you're ethical in all parts of your life." Right? So I am 100% on board with you in the universities, right? In next to accounting 101, right? We should be teaching values, and they're not just business values; they're your values. I mean, now you got me started, so I'm really excited, right? So one of the things that I talk about is a character, right? So a company culture is the same as a person's character, and once you define your character, it doesn't matter what situation you're in. It doesn't matter if you're at work. if you're at work, at school, or if you're at play, if you're out with your friends, I mean, your character is your character. People should be able to recognize you as the same individual, regardless of what situation you're in, right? So if I have ethics, I have ethics in my family, and I have ethics in my business. It's going to carry over because it's a fundamental value to me. If I lack ethics, I'll probably have 6 affairs with my wife. I'll probably cheat on my income taxes, and I'll probably cheat in my company too. I'll cheat customers. I'll cheat, shareholders, because I have no ethics. So if you have a strong character and your strong character is underlined by strong values, you're going to carry those values and that character no matter where you are. So I think we're at educational institutions. Academia is great at teaching skill sets. And I was a guest speaker at one of the universities here in San Diego. And that's exactly what I told them. I said, look, academia is great at teaching you how to be a better accountant, how to be a better marketeer, right? Those are things of what you do. So they teach you how to be a better individual in things that you do. We need to spend a lot more time teaching you how to be a better human being of who you are. And universities and academia really don't address that. Parents have to address that. I mean, that's one of the primary things a parent has to do with their kids, and is teaching those values and teaching who you want to be and who you are. Academia should kind of take a lead on that as well, and say, okay, well, what are the right values?
Yeah. It's funny when you mentioned this aspect about ethics, and you're talking about, cheating in your business. I wouldn't necessarily say cheating your customers, but I wonder how many CEOs went into their CFO's office when the quarter was looking bad and said, we need to change the allocation for bad debts on that financial statement to make it look like it's went from the red to the black, because everyone's bonuses got paid out what they were 1 point on the black. And I kind of wonder, eventually that catches up with you. I would like to believe it catches up with you, but I wonder how many companies are ethical, or what I prefer to say is moral, because, when I look at ethics, I can go, well, the ethics of if we were to all take hedonism as an ethical discipline, then it may not be great. But if we go and we look at morals and that we're trying to do the right thing the right way all the time, then we have a very positive ethical outcome.
Well, and for the university part, I agree with you. I think at least why, to me, it's important to be part of a university that is rooted in the liberal arts, because that's where a lot of that comes from. Higher ed has transformed itself, as a business, and I understand the reasons why. I'm not value judging it, but I understand why it exists as it does. But it definitely has that glaring flaw in it that they're providing a skill set based outcome rather than we're going to produce better human beings as the outcome.
I'm wondering, so I see all these things on social media about parents complaining with COVID that their kids are home. And I kind of go, to me, I feel like it's a blessing, because now we get to be more involved and kind of go, you know what? I don't really agree with this. Those values as a parent need to be instilled upon our children in order for it to echo in eternity. And I look at it as a blessing that they're getting the benefit of a structured learning framework, and I get to hear it directly and get to opine on what I feel I need to. Not on everything, but on certain pieces. I'm like, I kind of like it. I would love for them to be, back in, kids need a little bit more interaction, but I happen to actually like this, so to speak, environment because I get to be more involved.
I'm with you. I'm with you. I'm sorry, Jason, please go.
Oh, no. I was just going to say real quick. For me, I hear people say, oh, I wish my kids were back. No, dude, I like my kid. I like having her around. Like, what are you talking about, man? I don't get it.
Well, look, again, it gets back to values, right? It gets back to value like account and responsibility. I mean, you're responsible for your kids. You're accountable for your own kids. Again, we're getting back to biblical, values. Biblically, we're taught that we have to teach our kids. Biblically, we thought that we have to discipline and teach our kids. I mean, that's what parenting is. That's why you're on earth, that, you have some kids and you bring them up right and you teach them the right values, and they become productive members of society. And I don't know where we are, where we are with this in the country, but I agree with you. Parents don't want to be parents. They want to just have babysitters for their kids. The teachers can become babysitters for the kids. And look, I've seen a lot of this in the expat world, where the expat working spouse was working, hard, traveling hard. The stay-at-home expat person was, doing charity function and everything else, and that money was never an object. And hey kid, here is $100 and go keep yourself busy. Go buy a video game. Like, it's just babysitters. Whether you give your kid $100 bill, whether you give a kid a video game or whatever, those are substitutions for you being a parent. And parents have to take responsibility for their kids, and they have to be accountable for their kids. And I don't know how we got to where we are today as a society, where we think that's a nuisance. But I'm with you guys. I mean, yeah.
My 13-year-old stepson, he up until recently, I'm like, well, what are you going to do with your life, 13-year-old? He's like, I'm going to be a cashier at Costco. I'm like, what? Like, why is that okay? And so I said to him a couple of weeks ago, and I said, okay, 13-year-old, I want you to imagine yourself as your older brother who's 25. And what would your 25-year-old self look like? And what advice would he give you today on how to get there? And so then he starts having to break it down. And he came up with, he would like to be a gunsmith. Well, you know what? That's a lot better than a cashier at Costco. Okay. And yeah, he's into a lot of the first person shooter games, like, every basically kid, it seems like at this point. I'm like, okay, well, then you need to research and tell me what a gunsmith needs to do. Like, what's the training that you need? What classes in school do you need to be really good at to be there? And how much money is that going to make? And he comes up, I'm like, so like, what kind of car are you going to drive? He goes, oh, well, I'm going to drive this Lexus SUV. And I'm like, you do realize that's more money, right? Like the entry level gunsmith makes like, $28,000 or something like that, depending on, where you go. But it can make good money depending on what kind of, hey, if you're going to be certified by SIG and all this kind of stuff. But I'm like, that car's $90,000. And you're going to make like 28. So we probably need to think about this. How much is an apartment? How much is a 1-bedroom apartment cost at this time? How much money do you think you're going to spend in food? So I had him research all these things. And then I'm like, okay, great. It's a great starting point. Now share it with your dad, and share it. He's got a, not a guidance counselor, but like an education coach that kind of helps him, because he's got, ADD or ADHD, one of those things where I kind of go, well, he just doesn't want to do this because it doesn't interesting to him. Because when he's interested in things, like you could show him a picture of a tank and he could tell you what model that is, what country it's from. Like, he could tell you the whole gambit. Yeah. He loves those things. But I just kind of got him thinking about, well, hey, you're 13 now. Where do you think you're going to be when you double your age? He spent a lot of time. And then I would ask him questions back on it. I mean, I'm like, okay, now you've got a plan. Your plan might change later, but I don't think
great leaders ask great questions.
Yeah. Right? I don't think I would have had this advantage. Yeah. I don't think I would have had this type of interaction if we didn't have COVID.
Yeah.
Right.
I would like to think I would, but
you may not have the opportunity.
Similar to that story, I was out in Salt Lake skiing with my kids the other day, and we had a dinner, and my youngest daughter, who's an outside adventurer, she's excellent at it. She climbs mountains, summits, highest summits in the United States. She's an avid skier, so she's a really big outdoorsman. But as opposed to my middle daughter, who's a very career-oriented high flyer who makes a lot of money, right? If you ask my youngest daughter, she's like, well, yeah, I can camp for the next year. I don't need an apartment. I can just camp out and, live out of a trailer or whatever. And then, the conversation went about, they went out on a date, and, all these loser guys that don't have jobs, that can't afford to buy dinner and this and that. I was like, well, look, if that's the inner circle that you're hanging around with, right? If you're hanging around with rich guys, they can go buy you a steak dinner. If you're hanging around with the people who are in the same kind of mindset to say, hey, we want to climb mountains and we don't really care about a job and we really don't care about, how high our income is, then that's what you're going to get. You're going to get a guy that, can't afford to take you to anywhere but McDonald's, right? So just, figure out what you want, what your long-term goal is, how you want to get there, and surround yourself with those people to get there.
Right.
Well said.
Almost like they're co-mentors, right? In some way.
Absolutely. So, Tom, you've basically kind of, at least in my opinion, at this point, from looking down where I'm at to where you have already accomplished, you've accomplished all these things. You've got this book out. But what I want to know is what's next? What's your next goal? And how can Jason and I and whoever may be watching, how can we help you be accountable to this next goal?
So look, my goal at this stage is really giving back. Right? Why did I write this book? I wrote the book because I've had some life experiences. I know, look, when I was 20 or 30, if somebody said, Tom, here's a book that can help you become a better leader and become more successful in life, read it. Learn from my mistakes, not from your own mistakes. So I made a lot of mistakes because I didn't have a book like this to read. I read many books, but I probably didn't start reading books until I was in my, mid-30s. Before that, I was a gun-ho 20, 30, late 20-year-old executive, and I knew it all. I had all the answers, right? So then I got a little bit of wisdom and I started reading books, and now I'm at the stage where I was fortunate enough and blessed enough that I've had some good experiences. I've lived a good life. So how can I share those failures and successes with others so they can learn from my mistakes and from my wins? And it was through this book. And then when I set out this book, I said, look, well, let me write a summary book. This is sort of a summary book. So it says, all right, these are the 4 keys, actually 5 keys, because there's a bonus key in there, the 5th key. And then as a next step, I'll write another book for each one of those keys, break it down, a lot more detail. So the idea is to have 5 books. This is actually 6 books. This is the first one, then 5 more. And, that should pan out in the next, 3 to 4 years, maybe a book a year. And that will get me into my late 60s.
So this time next year, we should be talking about your second book then. I
hope so.
That's what I heard too, Dan.
If you don't see it, you better give me a call and say, Tom.
Yeah, I'm like, Tom, what's going on? Oh, I definitely will. If we can't hold each other accountable for whatever's next, then how are we all going to, as the ninja over here likes to say, how are we going to get out of this galaxy at some point? At some point, this sun's going to die.
Yeah.
So everything's got to be an incremental point to get beyond the Milky Way.
Yeah, man. Cumulative marginal gains.
Absolutely. So, Tom, I really appreciate you coming on. Any parting words for Jason and I and whoever may wind up watching later?
Well, I hope a lot of people are watching. Parting words is, first of all, cheers. Thank you so much, because if it wasn't for you, I probably would have cranked open that Method of Madness. So it was enjoyable just to do a couple of sips. My parting words are as follows. Imagine you have 3 circles. And I call it the Venn diagram. You have one circle, another circle, and then there's 3 circles intersect. So ask yourself 3 questions. The first question is, who am I? And for me, I'm a servant leader. That's who I'm defined as. The second question is, what am I passionate about? Right? I'm passionate about adding value and making other people better. And the third question is, what am I good at? Well, I'm pretty good at mentoring a lead. Right? So, and then where those three circles intersect, that's where you should be living your life. And if you actually find a market for that, not only will you be successful, but you'll also be rich. So my advice to everybody as a parting word is know who you are, know what you're passionate about, know what you're good at, and that's what you should be doing. Find a market for it, you'll be rich.
Amen.
Well said.
That was a great way to close. Tom, if there's anything that I can do, and I'll speak on behalf of Jason, that we can do for you in return, please don't hesitate to reach out. You know, I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, this was a lot of fun.
All right. Thank you all.
God bless you guys.
Perfect. Take care, everyone. And have a great rest of your week.
Yeah, cheers, everybody. Take care.
Bye.